Most people measure their lives in years, in paychecks, or in family milestone. I've always measured mine in these minutes and seconds. That's the language of the land. It's a language that doesn't lie, doesn't negotiate, and certainly doesn't move just because you have a lot of money. I spent 40 years as a commercial surveyor, mapping out everything from highway interchange to skyscraper. I know where the world begins and where it ends. But the most important line I ever drew was the one bordering my own 400 acres of timberland in northern Idaho. It was a place I bought to get away from noise, from concrete, and from people who think the rules don't apply to them. I had been gone for a month, a long overdue trip to help my daughter renovate her place in Montana. I left my property silent, wrapped in the dormant gray of late winter, the only sound being the wind moving through the Douglas firs. I expected to come back to that same silence. I wanted that silence. It's why I live 40 miles from the nearest traffic light. But as my truck climbed the final switchback of the county access road, a gravel track I've maintained myself for 2 decades, the air changed. It wasn't a subtle shift. Usually at this elevation, the air smells of cold stone, damp pine needles, and the sharp, clean scent of snowmelt. But before I even rounded the bend, a new smell hit me. Heavy, oily, the thick chemical stench of fresh asphalt. And beneath that, something even stranger, the sharp sting of chlorine. I slowed the truck. My tires crunched over the familiar gravel, and then, abruptly, the gravel stopped. I didn't stop because I wanted to. I stopped because the world I knew had vanished. Where my narrow, tree-lined access road used to be, there was now a 4-lane blacktop highway. It was smooth, dark, and wide enough to land a Cessna on. The trees, my trees, that had lined this ridge for 80 years were gone. In their place stood perfectly manicured berms of non-native grass, blindingly green and completely unnatural against the rugged mountain backdrop. But the road was just the appetizer. The main course sat 100 yards ahead, dead center in my windshield. A gatehouse. Not a fence, not a barrier, but a fortress. It was a massive structure built of faux river stone and cedar beams, looming over the road like a castle turret. A wrought iron gate, black and gold, spanned the lane. To the left and right, 2 massive fountains shot jets of water 20 feet through the air, the spray catching the sunlight. That explained the chlorine smell. They were pumping treated pool water into the air in the middle of a protected watershed. Above the gate, in gold letters that probably cost more than my truck, read the words, Emerald Hills Estates. I turned off the ignition. The silence I had driven 500 miles for was gone. Instead, I heard the mechanical hum of industrial pumps and the distant, rhythmic thwack-thwack of a sprinkler system. I didn't yell. I didn't pound the steering wheel. Panic is for people who don't know where they stand. I knew exactly where I stood. I stepped out of the truck, my boots hitting the fresh pavement with a dull thud that felt wrong in my knees. I walked to the edge of the asphalt. I looked at the tree line, then back at the gatehouse. My internal GPS, honed by 4 decades of field work, was screaming. The topography was wrong. The ridge line didn't line up with the county easement. This wasn't just an encroachment. This wasn't a neighbor building a fence 6 inches over the line because he couldn't find the pin. This was an invasion. I walked back to the truck and opened the heavy steel toolbox in the bed. I didn't reach for a phone or a lawyer. I reached for the yellow fiberglass case that has traveled more miles than most pilots. I pulled out my Wild Tietwo theodolite. It's an older optical instrument, Swiss-made, heavy, and precise, to within a fraction of a second of an arc. Modern surveyors use GPS rovers that beep and talk to satellite. I have those too. But when you need to know the truth, the absolute, undeniable, court-admissible truth, you use optics. You use geometry. I set the tripod legs into the soft dirt on the shoulder of their brand-new road. I leveled the instrument, watching the bubble center itself. I swung the scope toward the erratic granite boulder on the north slope, the one referenced in the 1975 geodetic survey as the primary benchmark for this section. I sighted the rock. I locked the horizontal motion. Then I turned the scope 90 degrees and dipped it to the south. Through the lens, the crosshairs didn't land on trees. They didn't land on dirt. The crosshairs settled perfectly, damningly, on the copper flashing of the guard shack's roof. I checked the angle again. I did the mental math, converting the slope distance. I rechecked the deed coordinates I had memorized 20 years ago. The blood in my veins ran cold, then hot. This wasn't a mistake. You don't accidentally pave 4 lanes of asphalt. You don't accidentally trench power lines, pour 50 yards of concrete, and build a staffed security center. You certainly don't accidentally miss a property line by the length of a football field. According to the optics, the county road easement ended 300 feet behind me. Everything in front of me, the fountains, the manicured grass, the gold letters, the guard shack, was sitting squarely on my land. A security guard in a yellow vest stepped out of the booth. He started walking toward me, hand on his belt, looking like he was about to tell a trespasser to move along. I didn't look at him. I looked at the numbers on the vernier scale of my theodolite. They had built a monument to their own arrogance. And they had built it on the property of the one man in the state who could prove, down to the millimeter, exactly how much of it was going to have to be torn down. I capped the lens. The silence of the woods was gone, replaced by the hum of their pumps. But as I packed the instrument away, I knew a different kind of silence was coming, for the silence of a job site shut down by a court order. I got back in my truck, started the engine, and drove straight toward the gate. They wanted an entrance. Fine. I was about to make one. I didn't ram the gate. That would be destruction of property, and if there's one thing a surveyor respects, it's the definition of property. Instead, I drove around the temporary construction barricades they hadn't bothered to secure, parking my dusty Ford F-250 right next to a line of sparkling clean German sedans. The contrast was deliberate. My truck had a winch, a toolbox, and mud from 3 different counties on the tires. Their cars looked like they'd panic if they hit a pothole. I walked up the flagstone path to the sales center. It was the clubhouse, or at least, the shell of one. They had finished the lobby to dazzle potential buyers, leaving the back half likely framed with cheap pine and hope. I pulled the heavy glass door open and stepped inside. The air conditioning was set to meat locker cold, and the air smelled of espresso, expensive cologne, and desperation. A receptionist with a headset looked up, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second when she saw my flannel shirt and the field mud caked on my boots. I didn't give her time to ask if I had an appointment. I walked past the marble desk, past the scale model of the community that looked like a toy train set for millionaires, and headed straight for the glass-walled office at the back. The plaque on the door read Sterling Vance, Director of Development. I didn't knock. I opened the door and stepped in. Sterling looked up from his desk. He was a man built for brochures, perfectly tan, teeth whitened to an unnatural brightness, wearing a suit that cost more than my first tractor. He was on the phone, laughing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. When he saw me, he held up a finger, finished his sentence with a "let's make it happen, buddy," and hung up. He leaned back, looking me up and down. He didn't see a man who had spent 40 years mapping the spine of this state. He saw a local. He saw a nuisance. He saw someone who probably wanted a job mowing the lawn. "Deliveries are around back, Chief," Sterling said, his voice smooth like oil on water. "But since you're here, try not to track dirt on the Italian tile. We just had it sealed." I didn't move. I stood there, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel the weight of a man who doesn't rush. "I'm not here to deliver anything, Mr. Vance, except maybe a reality check. I'm Jack Miller. I own the 400 acres you just paved over." Sterling's eyebrows lifted, just a millimeter, a flicker of recognition but not respect. He chuckled, a condescending sound that grated on my nerves like sand in a bearing. "Ah, Mr. Miller, the neighbor. We tried to reach out to you, sent a few letters, a nice gift basket, I believe. We never heard back, so we assumed you were absent." "I was in Montana," I said, my voice low and steady. "And absence isn't permission. You're 100 yards over the line. The gate, the fountains, this building, it's all sitting on parcel 44B, my parcel." Sterling sighed, the exaggerated sigh of a parent explaining quantum physics to a toddler. He stood up, walked around his massive mahogany desk, and picked up a glossy, trifold brochure. He opened it, tapping a colorful, cartoonish map with a manicured finger. "Look, Jack, can I call you Jack? You're confused. It happened. The woods look alike, but we have a master plan here. This is Emerald Hills. We have top-tier engineers, we have permits, we have a vision." He shoved the brochure toward my chest. See this green line? That's the boundary. We're well within our rights. Maybe your grandfather planted a fence wrong 50 years ago, but we go by the data. I looked at the brochure. It was a marketing drawing. It had cartoon trees and happy little digital families walking digital dogs. It wasn't a survey. It wasn't a legal document. It was a fantasy. I don't look at cartoons, I said, ignoring the paper. I look at geodetic marker. I just shot the azimuth from the primary benchmark on the North Ridge. You aren't close to the line, Sterling. You're occupying it. You need to halt construction, remove the encroachments, and restore the grade. Sterling's smile vanished. The salesman mask dropped, revealing the shark beneath. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, smelling of mint and arrogant. Listen to me, old-timer. We have $50 million invested in this Phase 1 launch. We have pre-sales closing next week. I have investors from Dubai to Dallas flying in. You think I'm going to stop a bulldozer because a local with a compass thinks he knows better than a multinational development firm? He laughed again, but this time it was cold. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out of here. You're going to go back to your little cabin, and you're going to enjoy the increase in your property value that we're kindly providing you. If you come back here disrupting my business again, I won't call a manager. I'll call the sheriff, and I'll have you trespassing on my property. Do we understand each other? I looked at the expensive suit, the fake map, and the absolute, unshakable confidence of a man who has never been told no by anyone poorer than him. He didn't know he was talking to the man who wrote the standard practice guide for boundary surveying used by the very county he was threatening to call. He thought the dirt on my boots meant I was stupid. He had made the classic mistake of the city man in the mountain. He thought money was the only law that mattered. We understand each other perfectly, I said. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the brochure. I turned around and walked out. My boots left a trail of dried mud on his pristine Italian tile, a breadcrumb trail leading right back to the woods he was trying to steal. He thought he had won. He thought he had scared off the confused old local. He had no idea he had just handed me the one thing a surveyor needs to bury someone: motive. He wasn't just mistaken, he was willfully blind. And as I stepped back out into the blinding sun, listening to the hum of the stolen fountain, I knew exactly what I had to do next. If he liked paper so much, I was about to bury him. My workshop is the only place in the world that makes sense to me. Sterling's office was glass and performative minimalism, a stage set designed to sell a lie. My workshop is concrete floors, walls lined with topographical maps, and flat file cabinets that hold the history of this county in sheets of mylar and linen. It smells of graphite, dust, and the sharp tang of ammonia from the blueprint machine I still keep running in the corner. I locked the door, flipped on the overhead banks of fluorescent lights, and went to work. Sterling had called me confused. He had waved a glossy brochure as if it were scripture. But in my world, truth isn't printed on glossy stock. It's drawn in ink on linen and filed with the county recorder. I walked to the third cabinet, drawer 4, section 12, township 4 north, range 3 west. I didn't need to look up the index. I knew exactly where the records lived. I pulled the original 1975 plat. It was a beautiful document, hand-drawn by Elias Thorne, a man who taught me that a surveyor's signature is an oath. The paper was yellow, the edges soft, but the lines were black and absolute. I laid it out on my light table, smoothing the corners with brass weights. Then I pulled the modern digital overlay I'd printed from the County Geese server before I left for Montana, the one that showed the proposed Emerald Hills development. I switched on the light table. The backlight hummed, illuminating the old linen from beneath. I aligned the section corners, the immutable iron pins driven into the earth 50 years ago. The two maps should have snapped together like a puzzle. They didn't. I grabbed my loupe, a heavy, brass-rimmed magnifying glass, and leaned in. The discrepancy wasn't a drift. It wasn't the result of a sloppy chain measurement from the 1940s. The entire western boundary of the Emerald Hills development had been shifted. On their digital map, the line jogged west, a jagged, aggressive scar eating into my parcel. Why? I whispered to the empty. Why there? Surveyors make mistakes. We're human. We transpose numbers. We misread a vernier scale. But this wasn't a transposition error. A mistake is random. This was specific. The line didn't just wander. It reached out and grabbed a specific topographical feature before returning to the true boundary half a mile south. I moved to the computer and pulled up the LiDAR scan, laser imaging that strips away the vegetation to show the bare earth. I toggled the layers, terrain, elevation, hydrology, and there it was. The mistake in the boundary line encompassed a small depression contour at elevation 42 feet. On a standard map, it looks like nothing. But I know this land. I've walked every acre. I closed my eyes and pictured that spot. It was a cluster of fractured basalt, shaded by ancient cedars, and in the center of those rocks was the Arctic Spring. It was a deep source aquifer outlet, pure, cold, high-pressure water that ran year-round, even in the dead of August when the creeks ran dry. It never froze. It never slowed. I looked back at the brochure Sterling had given me. I hadn't thrown it away. I opened it to the page boasting about the grand entrance. The copy read, "Sustainable, gravity-fed water features utilizing natural on-site resources." The rage that hit me then wasn't the hot, flashing anger of the road. It was the cold, heavy clear-headedness of a judge passing a sentence. They hadn't just paved my land because it was convenient. They had stolen the land to steal the water. They needed the Arctic Spring to feed those two massive fountains flanking their gate. Pumping city water up that grade would cost them thousands a month. Stealing my gravity-fed spring, free. This wasn't negligence. This was grand larceny disguised as development. I sat back on my stool, the silence of the workshop feeling heavy. Sterling Vance knew. You don't engineer a gravity feed system without a hydrological study. Their engineer would have seen the spring was on my land, so they simply moved the line on the map and hoped the confused local wouldn't notice until the statute of limitations ran out. I reached for the phone. I didn't dial the sheriff. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years, but one I knew by heart. "Saul Goodman and Associates, how can we put him on?" I said. "Sir, Mr. Goodman is in a deposition. I can't." "Tell him Jack Miller found the bodies," I said. It was an old joke between us, from a boundary dispute back in '98 involving a graveyard and a golf course. 3 seconds later, the line clicked. "Jack." Saul's voice sounded like gravel in a blender. "I thought you retired. I thought you were fishing. Why are you calling me in the middle of a Tuesday? I need you to open a file, Saul, a big one." "Who's the target?" "Emerald Hills Estates, Sterling Vance." Saul let out a low whistle. "That's big money, Jack. New York money. What did they do? Clip a fence?" "They paved 4 lanes across the North Ridge. They built a gatehouse on my property. And Saul, they stole the Arctic Spring." The line went quiet. Saul knows land law better than he knows his own children. He knows that in the West, water rights are worth more than blood. Stealing land is a civil tort. Stealing water, that's reason for war. "You have the data?" Saul asked, his voice shifting. No longer the friend, now the shark. "I have the 1975 linen. I have the geodetic verify. I have the LiDAR. And I have their own brochure admitting they're using on-site resources that aren't on their site." "Jack," Saul said, and I could practically hear him smiling, the predatory grin of a man who just smelled a ribeye steak. "Don't talk to them again. Don't answer the phone. I'm driving up there tomorrow. We're not just going to sue them. We're going to foreclose on their arrogance." "I don't want money, Saul," I said, looking at the map where the green line of my forest used to be. "I want my mountain back." "You'll get it," Saul promised. "But first we're going to make them bleed paper." I hung up. The hum of the blueprint machine seemed louder now, rhythmic and steady. I looked down at the light table, at the truth glowing up through the layers of deception. Sterling thought he had buried the truth under asphalt and money. He forgot that the earth remembers everything. And so do I. I turned off the light table. The room went dark save for the single desk lamp. The deep work was done. The facts were incontrovertible. Now came the part I used to hate but suddenly found myself looking forward to. The fight. Saul Goodman drives a 1998 Lincoln Town car that smells like peppermint lifesaver and old court filing. It's a boat of a car, floating over the potholes that would shatter the suspension of Sterling Vance's German sedan. Saul himself looks less like a high-powered attorney and more like a high school chemistry teacher who gave up on grading papers a decade. Rumpled suit, tie slightly askew, and eyes that have seen every lie a human being is capable of telling under oath. But when he stepped out of the Lincoln in front of the Emerald Hills Sales Center, he buttoned his jacket with a single, sharp motion. His posture changed. The slouch vanished. He picked up his leather briefcase, which was scarred and scuffed, and looked at me. "Let's go ring the bell," he said. We walked in together. The receptionist didn't smile this time. She reached for the phone immediately, her fingers tapping a frantic rhythm. Saul ignored her. He walked straight to Sterling's glass door and knocked once, hard, before pushing it open. Sterling was there, and surprisingly, he wasn't alone. Two other men were sitting on the low leather couch in the corner. They wore identical navy suits and expressions of bored hostility. "Corporate counsel. They had been expecting us." "Mr. Vance," Saul said, his voice projecting that courtroom baritone that rattles windows. "I'm Saul Goodman, representing Mr. Jack Miller. You have been served via certified mail this morning, but I believe in the personal touch." Saul dropped a thick envelope onto the mahogany desk. It hit with a heavy, flat thud that echoed in the silent room. "Notice to vacate and restore," Saul announced. "You have 10 days to remove all encroachments from Parcel 44B, including the gatehouse, the roadway, and the subterranean plumbing illegally diverting the Arctic Spring. Failure to comply will result in an immediate filing for injunctive relief and damages." I watched Sterling. I expected anger. I expected him to yell, to bluster, to call security. Instead, he laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a genuine, belly-shaking chuckle. He picked up the envelope Saul had dropped, weighed it in his hand like a piece of fruit, and then tossed it unopened in the trash can beside his desk. "That's cute," Sterling said, wiping a tear from his eye. "Notice to vacate. You guys really printed that out and everything." He looked at the two suits on the couch. One of them, a man with a buzz cut and a scar on his chin, stood up. He walked over to Sterling's desk, picked up a manila folder that had been sitting there the whole time, and held it out to me. "Mr. Miller," the lawyer said, his voice flat and robotic, "you are officially served." I frowned, not taking it. Saul stepped in and snatched the folder. He flipped it open, scanning the cover page. His eyes narrowed behind his wire-rimmed glasses. The silence in the room stretched tight as a bowstring. "What is this?" I asked. Saul didn't look up. "It's a lawsuit, Jack. Emerald Hills Development LLC versus Jack Miller." He flipped a page. "Counts of harassment, slander of title, tortious interference with business expectancy, and a claim for adverse possession under color of title." "Adverse possession," I snapped. "That takes 20 years of open use. They paved it last month." Sterling leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. "We purchased the development rights from the previous holding company, Jack. We're claiming their historical usage tacked onto ours. Is it true? Who knows? But it's going to take about 3 years and $100,000 in legal fees for you to prove it isn't." He stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against the edge, looking down at us. "See, that's the thing you locals don't get," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You think this is about who's right. It's not. It's about who can afford to be right. I have a legal retainer that covers this kind of nuisance automatically. You're going to be burning your retirement savings just to file a response." He nodded to the lawyer, who pulled a single sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. "However," Sterling continued, checking his watch, "I'm a generous man, and I hate to see a neighbor go bankrupt fighting a war he can't win." He slid the paper across the desk toward me. "It was a purchase agreement. We'll buy the disputed 40 acres, Sterling said. "We'll classify it as a buffer zone. We'll pay you. Let's see." He glanced at the paper. $10,000, and we drop the lawsuit. You walk away with cash, and you don't lose your house paying this guy. He jerked a thumb at Saul. "To lose the case for you. $10,000. The timber value alone on those 40 acres was worth 50 times that. The water rights were priceless. It wasn't an offer. It was an insult wrapped in a threat." I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Sterling. "You're suing me," I said, my voice quiet, "for telling you to get off my land. And you're trying to steal 40 acres for the price of a used Camry. I'm offering you a life raft, Jack," Sterling smiled. "Because right now you're drowning. You just don't know it yet. That lawsuit freezes your title. You can't sell. You can't borrow against the land. And every time your lawyer files a motion, I'll file 3 more. I will bury you in so much paper you'll need a compass just to find your way to the bathroom." He was using the system. He was weaponizing the very law I had spent my life upholding. He knew he was wrong. He knew the line was wrong, but he was counting on the fact that justice is expensive. He was bullying me, plain and simple. I felt a tightening in my chest, not fear but clarity. It was the same feeling I got when I found a structural crack in a bridge support. You don't paint over it, you don't ignore it, you condemn the structure. I took the purchase agreement. I folded it carefully in half, then in half again, and again, until it was a thick, hard square of paper. I placed it gently on his desk. "Saul," I said, "how much is your retainer?" Saul looked up from the lawsuit, a grim smile playing on his lips. "For this, we'll work something out." "No," I said, staring at Sterling. "I want to pay full price, because I want you to hurt them." I turned to Sterling. "You think paper is power, Sterling. You think because you can file a motion you own the ground. But you forgot one thing." "Oh," Sterling raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "You're standing on the wrong side of the line," I said, "and until the court tells me otherwise, that road isn't a road. It's a trespassing structure on private property, and I have the right to maintain my property." "Don't do anything stupid, Jack," Sterling warned, his smile slipping. "I won't," I said. "I'm going to do everything exactly by the book." "My book?" I turned to Saul. "Let's go. We have a gate to build." As we walked out, I didn't hear Sterling laughing any. I heard the silence of a man wondering if he had just kicked a dog that bites back. He had threatened me with bankruptcy. He had threatened my home. He wanted a war of attrition. Fine. He was about to find out that I didn't need a courtroom to stop a car. I just needed a chain. They filed the lawsuit on a Tuesday. They expected me to panic. They expected me to spend the next week frantically calling banks, trying to scrape together a defense fund while they bulldozed the rest of my ridge. That's the corporate playbook. Bury the little guy in fear and paperwork until he suffocates. But they forgot one crucial detail about property law. A lawsuit freezes the title, meaning I couldn't sell the land, but it doesn't strip the owner of possession. Until a judge bangs a gavel and says otherwise, that land was still mine. And in the state of Idaho, a landowner has an affirmative duty to secure his perimeter against liability hazards. If someone drives on my land and crashes, I get sued. Therefore, legally speaking, I was obligated to prevent unauthorized vehicles from entering my property. I called Saul at 6 p.m. "Can I secure the perimeter?" I asked. "As long as you don't destroy their improvements," Saul said, his voice wary. "You can't tear up the asphalt yet, Jack. That would be destruction of evidence." "I don't want to tear it up," I said, looking at the heavy steel pipe stacked behind my barn. "I just want to make sure nobody gets hurt trespassing." Saul paused. "Jack defines secure. Standard agricultural access control," I said. "Nothing permanent, just sturdy." Saul laughed. "Do it, but wear a safety vest. Make it look official." I didn't sleep that night. I called Mike, my old foreman from the highway department. Mike is 65, has hands like catcher's mitts, and hates developers more than he hates rust. I told him I had a fencing project that needed to be done before the morning commute. He didn't ask what or where. He just asked, "Do I need the auger or the welder?" "Both," I said. "And bring the big truck." We rolled out at 4 a.m. The moon was still high, casting a pale light over the Emerald Hills entrance. It was quiet. The fountains were humming. The guard shack was empty, the night shift guard apparently asleep in his chair, and the 4 lanes of fresh asphalt lay open and inviting. We parked the flatbed 50 feet in front of their fancy guard shack, right on the property line. My property line. Mike hopped out, spat on the ground, and looked at the asphalt. "Pretty pavement," he grunted. "Shame." "Safety first," I said, handing him a high-vis vest. We set up cone. We turned on the amber strobe lights on the truck. To anyone watching, we looked like a county maintenance crew. Then we started the auger. If you've never heard a diamond-tipped core drill biting into fresh asphalt, it's a sound that screams authority. It's loud, grinding, and industrial. We cored 4 neat holes, 2 on each side of the road, right through their beautiful blacktop and down into the compacted road base. The guard in the shack woke up. He stumbled out, blinking, his uniform shirt untucked. "Hey," he shouted, jogging toward us. "Hey, you can't drill here. This is private property." I didn't stop mixing the quickset concrete. I just pointed to the survey stake I had driven into the shoulder 5 minutes earlier. "You're right," I yelled over the engine noise. "It is private property. Mine. Go back to sleep, son. This doesn't concern you." "I'm calling Mr. Vance," he stammered, reaching for his radio. "You do that," Mike said, dropping a 6-inch steel post into the hole with a wet thunk. "Tell him his landlord is doing some renovation." By 5:30 a.m. the concrete was setting. By 6 a.m. we had welded the cross-bracing. We didn't install a delicate chain-link fence. We didn't install a pretty wooden gate. We installed a dual-swing, heavy-gauge steel cattle gate, the kind used to hold back 2,000 pounds of angry bull. It was painted a dull, agricultural red, a color that clashed violently with the HOA's mountain chic aesthetic of slate and cedar. We swung the gates shut across all 4 lanes. They met in the middle with a heavy metallic clang that sounded like a prison door closing. I took a heavy logging chain, grade 70 transport chain, gold chromate plated, and wrapped it through the center bars. I secured it with a puck lock, the kind you can't cut with bolt cutters. But I wasn't done. "Hand me the striper," I told Mike. I took the inverted spray paint machine, the kind used for marking utility lines. I walked to the center of their entrance lane, right in front of my new gate. In bright, undeniable construction orange paint, I wrote directly on their pristine blacktop, "Private property, no trespassing, agricultural zone 44B." It was ugly. It was aggressive. It was legal. We packed up the tools and pulled the truck onto the shoulder, just inside my timberline. I poured 2 cups of coffee from my thermos, handed one to Mike, and sat on the tailgate. "Now," I said, checking my watch, "we wait for the rush." The first car arrived at 6:45 a.m., a white Range Rover. The driver, a woman in a tennis outfit, slowed down as she approached the gate. She stopped, seemingly confused by the red steel barrier blocking her path to the highway. She honked once. A polite, "Excuse me," honk. Nothing happened. She honked again, longer this time. Then she rolled down her window and leaned out. "Hello, the gate is stuck." I took a sip of coffee. "It's not stuck, ma'am," I called out calmly. "It's locked." "Locked," she shrieked. "I have a lesson at 7. "Open it." "Can't do that," I said. "This is a private agricultural access road. It's closed for liability reasons." "This is the main entrance," she screamed. "Not anymore," I said. By 7:15 a.m. the backup had begun. It was a beautiful disaster. A line of luxury SUVs, Porsches, and Teslas stretched back from my cattle gate, winding past the guard shack and disappearing into the development. The sheer geometry of the traffic jam was satisfying. These were cars designed for speed, for status, now idling helplessly behind a $200 piece of farm equipment. The honking was a continuous, dissonant symphony. Drivers were out of their cars, pacing, shouting at the security guard, shouting at each other. The guard was hiding in his booth, pretending to be on the phone. And then Sterling arrived. He didn't drive up, he couldn't. His car was stuck somewhere in the snarl of traffic. He came running down the side of the road, his expensive suit jacket flapping, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He saw the gate. He saw the chain. He saw the orange spray paint defacing his entrance. And then he saw me, sitting on the tailgate drinking coffee. He stormed up to the gate, gripping the steel bars with manicured hands, shaking. The gate didn't budge. It rattled heavy and solid. "What is this?" Sterling screamed, his voice cracking. "What the hell is this?" "Morning, Sterling," I said pleasantly. "It's a gate. Standard livestock containment. We have a lot of loose animals in these woods. Didn't want anyone hitting a deer and suing me." "Open this immediately," he roared, spit flying. "This is illegal detention. You are blocking a public right-of-way." "No," I corrected him, standing up and walking to the fence. "I'm securing a private parcel. As you pointed out yesterday, there's a dispute over the title. My lawyer advised me that, until that dispute is settled, I have a duty to mitigate risk on the disputed land. Allowing 2,000 cars a day to drive on a construction site, that's high risk, Sterling. So I closed the site. People need to get to work," Sterling yelled, gesturing at the line of angry residents behind him. "You are kidnapping these." "They aren't kidnapped," I said, pointing toward the back of the development. "There's a construction exit on the south side, isn't there? The dirt road the cement trucks use. They can use that." Sterling went pale. The construction exit was 5 miles of rutted, muddy washboard track that dumped out onto a logging road. Sending a fleet of Mercedes and BMWs down that track would destroy their suspension and his reputation. "You "You petty son of a bitch," Sterling hissed. "I will have the sheriff here in 10 minutes. I will have you arrested for—" "Call him," I said, leaning closer to the bars. "But tell him to bring a bolt cutter that can handle hardened steel, and tell him to check the survey before he cuts." I turned back to Mike. "Top off your coffee, Mike. The circus is just getting into town." Sterling pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling with rage. The residents behind him were screaming for answers. One guy in a BMW was trying to drive over the landscaping berm, only to high-center his car on a decorative boulder. I watched the chaos. It wasn't just revenge, it was a physics lesson. They had applied force, money, lawyers, asphalt. I had applied an equal and opposite force, steel, geometry, and a heavy chain. "They look upset," Mike noted dryly. "They'll be more upset when they realize the only way out is through the mud," I said. The soft blockade was holding, but I knew this was just the opening skirmish. Sterling wasn't going to surrender to a cattle gate. He was calling the cavalry. "Here comes the flashing lights," Mike said, nodding down the county road. I turned. A sheriff's cruiser was speeding toward us, lights blazing. "Good," I said. "I brought my paperwork." The sheriff's cruiser didn't just pull up. It skidded to a halt, gravel spraying across the pavement. It was Deputy Miller again, the same officer who had handled the noise complaints when I was logging the South Ridge 3 years ago. Miller was a good man, but he was young and he looked tired. He stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his belt, his hand resting instinctively near his holster. Sterling didn't wait for Miller to assess the scene. He ran toward the cruiser like a man escaping a burning building. "Officer, thank God!" Sterling shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Arrest him. Immediately. He has barricaded a public thoroughfare. He's trapping 300 residents. This is false imprisonment." Miller looked at the line of luxury cars, the angry residents standing by their idling engine, and finally at the red steel cattle gate blocking the road. He walked up to the gate, pushed on it, and frowned when it didn't budge. He looked at me through the bars. "Jack," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "what the hell are you doing?" "Morning, Deputy," I said, keeping my hands visible and resting on the top rail. "I'm securing my property. Had some unauthorized commercial traffic tearing up the ground, so I put up a gate." "Unauthorized commercial traffic," Sterling shrieked. "This is the main entrance to Emerald Hills. You know that?" "I know it's on parcel 44B, I said calmly, "which belongs to me." Miller took off his hat and rubbed his forehead. "Jack, you can't just block a road. People need to get to work. You're creating a public disturbance." "I didn't block a public road, Deputy," I said, nodding toward the county sign 50 yards back. "The county road ends at that marker. This asphalt. This is a private driveway built without a permit on private land. I have no obligation to keep it open for Mr. Vance's customer." Sterling stepped in, sensing Miller's hesitation. He played his ace. I saw it coming before he even opened his mouth. He straightened his tie, lowered his voice to a tone of grave concern, and looked Miller in the eye. "Deputy," Sterling said, "forget the commute. This is a life safety issue. We have elderly residents in there. If an ambulance needs to get in or a fire truck needs to get out, this maniac has blocked the only paved access. That is a felony. Obstruction of emergency services. Code 18-703. Miller stiffened. The tiredness vanished from his eyes. Sterling had hit the magic button. You can argue about property lines all day, but you cannot endanger lives. Miller looked at me, his jaw set hard. "Is that true, Jack? Is this locked?" "It's locked," I said. "Unlock it," Miller ordered. He wasn't asking anymore. "Right now, or I will cut it and I will take you in for reckless endangerment." Sterling smirked, a small, victorious curling of his lip. He crossed his arms, waiting for the handcuffs. I didn't move toward the lock. Instead, I reached into my shirt pocket. Miller's hand twitched toward his taser. I moved slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a small, yellow slip of carbon paper. I held it through the bars. "Read it," I said. Miller took the slip. He glanced at it, then paused. He looked closer. "What is this?" Sterling demanded, trying to snatch it. Miller pulled it away. "It's a receipt," Miller said, confused. "From the county fire marshal." "Check the timestamp," I said. 4:30 a.m. this morning, before we poured the concrete." I pointed to the right post of the cattle gate. Welded to the steel was a small, heavy black box with a red reflective stripe. "That is a Knox box," I explained, my voice steady. Standard issue for commercial gates. Inside is a master key that fits the padlock on this chain. The fire department has the master key to open that box. So does the ambulance district. And I pointed to the receipt. I personally drove a duplicate key to the sheriff's dispatch office at 5 a.m. and logged it into your lockbox system. I looked at Sterling. Emergency services have full, unrestricted access. In fact, they have better access now than when you had that sleepy guard running the booth. So no, Sterling, I haven't blocked emergency services. I've just blocked you. Miller looked at the box. He looked at the receipt. Then he looked at Sterling. The tension in his shoulders dropped. The felony threat had evaporated instantly. He's got a Knox box, Mr. Vance, Miller said. He followed code. I don't care about a damn box, Sterling yelled, losing his composure entirely. He cannot block this road. It is a prescriptive easement. We have been using it. Since last month, I interjected. Prescriptive easement takes 5 years in Idaho. You know that, Miller sighed. He walked back to his cruiser, pulled out a clipboard, and walked back to the gate. Okay, he said. The safety issue is resolved, but we still have a dispute. Mr. Vance says this is his road. Jack, you say it's your land. I can't leave a riot going on. I have the survey, I said. I pulled the certified plat map from my back pocket, the one stamped by the county recorder yesterday afternoon. I unfolded it on the hood of my truck through the bars. Look at the coordinates, Deputy. The gate is at station 10 plus 50. The property line is at station 14 plus 0. This gate is 350 feet inside my legal boundary. Miller leaned over the map. He wasn't a surveyor, but he knew how to read a plat. He traced the line with his finger. He looked up at the guard shack, then back at the map. Mr. Vance, Miller said, straightening up, do you have a survey that contradicts this? It's at the office, Sterling stammered. My lawyers have it. It's complicated. The grading plan shifted the. Does it show this gate on your land? Miller asked bluntly. It shows that we have a right to be here, Sterling shouted. This is a civil matter. You can't let him do this based on a piece of paper he printed out. Exactly, Miller said. He stepped back from the gate. This is a civil matter. Sterling froze. What? If it's a civil matter, Miller said, tucking his thumbs into his belt, then I can't intervene unless a crime is being committed. He hasn't blocked emergency access. He's on land that he has a. If you think he's wrong, you take him to court. You're leaving. Sterling's voice rose an octave. You're leaving me locked out of my own development. I'm not a judge, Mr. Vance, Miller said. I enforce the peace. Right now the peace is being kept. Jack isn't threatening anyone. He's just gardening. Miller turned to me. Jack, keep it peaceful. If you touch one of these cars, I'll haul you in. Understand? Understood, Deputy, I said. Just watching the grass grow. Miller turned back to Sterling. I suggest you tell your folks to use the construction exit, sir, because I'm not cutting a lock on a civil dispute. Miller walked back to his cruiser. The sound of his door slamming shut was the loudest sound in the valley. He flipped off his lights, made a U-turn, and drove away. Sterling stood there. He looked at the departing cruiser. He looked at the line of 50 cars behind him, engines idling, drivers watching him with growing hostility. He looked at me. For a moment, I thought he might cry. The invincible armor of the developer had cracked. He wasn't the master of the universe anymore. He was just a guy in a suit standing on the wrong side of a fence. Open it, he whispered. Jack, please. I have investors coming at noon. Take the dirt road, Sterling, I said, pouring the last of my coffee into the dirt. It's scenic, I whistled to Mike. Let's pack up. I think we're done here. As we drove the truck back up the trail into the timber, leaving the chaos behind us, I watched Sterling in the rearview mirror. He was kicking the tire of a resident's Porsche, waving his arms, trying to explain why the grand entrance was now a dead end. We had won the battle, but as I watched him pull out his phone, his face twisted in a snarl, I knew the war was about to get dirty. Sterling wasn't going to fight fair anymore. He had tried money. He had tried the law. Now he was going to try something else. And I had to be ready for the dark. Most people think the fight ends when the sheriff drives away. They think a civil dispute implies civility, but I know men like Sterling Vance. To them, a locked gate isn't a legal boundary. It's an insult to their ego. And men like that don't sleep until they've settled the score. So I didn't sleep either. I parked my truck on the upper logging road, about 300 feet above the gatehouse. hidden behind a thick stand of lodgepole pine. From here, I had a clear line of sight down to the asphalt. I killed the engine, poured a cup of black coffee, and opened the Pelican case on the passenger seat. I wasn't holding a rifle. I was holding a controller. The drone sat on the hood of the truck, its rotors silent for now. It was a DJI Matrix, a commercial inspection unit outfitted with FLIR, forward-looking infrared, thermal imaging. It turns the night into a high-contrast world of heat and cold. I also had 3 trail cameras mounted in the trees down by the gate, set to trigger on motion and record in 4,000 night vision. I checked my watch. 2 a.m., the witching hour for cowards. At 2:14 a.m., the thermal screen on my dashboard lit up. A vehicle was coming down the county road. Not a resident's whisper-quiet Tesla, and not a security patrol. The heat signature of the engine block was massive, glowing white-hot against the cool blue of the pavement. A heavy-duty diesel pickup. It was driving with its headlights off. "There you are," I whispered. The truck rolled to a stop 10 feet from my cattle gate. 2 figures hopped out. On the thermal screen, they looked like glowing ghosts. One was carrying something long and heavy, bolt cutters. The other was dragging a hose. I powered up the drone. The rotors spun with a low hum, lost in the wind noise of the trees. I lifted off, keeping it high, hovering 200 feet directly above them. The first man, let's call him Cutter, attacked the chain. I watched on the screen as he struggled with the hardened steel. The bolt cutters were useless against grade 70 transport chain. I saw him throw the cutters down in frustration. He walked back to the truck and pulled out something else. A moment later, a shower of white-hot sparks erupted on the screen. An angle grinder. He was cutting the gate itself. That was criminal damage to property. A misdemeanor, maybe a low-level felony depending on the cost. It was exactly what I expected. I recorded it all, the sparks, the truck's license plate, the logo on the door which the drone's low-light camera picked up clearly. Ominous One Pool and Spa Services. Sterling hadn't sent thugs. He'd sent the pool maintenance crew. But then, the second man, Dumper, did something that made my stomach drop. While Cutter was grinding away at the hinge, Dumper dragged the hose toward the drainage ditch that runs parallel to the road. That ditch isn't just a ditch. It's a seasonal tributary that feeds directly into Coyote Creek, which flows into the Arctic Spring. My spring, the same water source Sterling was trying to steal. He walked back to the truck and flipped a lever on a tank mounted in the bed. A thick, dark liquid began to spew from the hose, cascading into the ditch. I zoomed in with the drone. Even without color, I knew what I was looking at. It was filter backwash, sludge. A concentrated slurry of chlorine, algicides, clarifiers, and human filth pumped out of the massive fountain system. Disposing of that stuff requires a HAZMAT manifest. You have to haul it to a treatment plant. It costs money. But dumping it into a waterway, that's not a fine. That's a federal crime. That's a violation of the Clean Water Act. I felt a cold rage settle over me, different from the anger about the road. The road was just asphalt. This was poison. They were dumping hundreds of gallons of toxic chemical waste directly into a spawning stream for cutthroat trout, all to save a few bucks and save face. "You stupid, greedy bastards," I hissed. I piloted the drone lower, dropping to 50 feet. I needed the money shot. I needed the face, the hose, and the liquid entering the water in a single frame. The grinder whined, screeching through the night. The sparks flew. The chemicals gushed. Dumper looked up, squinting into the dark. He must have heard the drone's buzz over the grinder. He pointed. Cutter stopped grinding, the sparks dying out. They both looked up. I snapped the phone. High resolution, geotagged, timestamped. Panic ensued. I watched them scramble. Dumper yanked the hose back, spraying sludge over his own boots. Cutter threw the grinder into the truck bed. They jumped in, tires spinning as they reversed wildly away from the half-cut gate, tearing back up the road toward the safety of the development. They thought they had been caught by a nosy neighbor. They thought they had fled the scene. They didn't realize they had just handed me the nuclear codes. I landed the drone and pulled the SD card. My hands were shaking, not from cold but from adrenaline. I had expected vandalism. I had uncovered an environmental disaster. I climbed down from the truck and walked down the ridge to the gate. The smell hit me 50 feet away, the sharp, burning scent of concentrated pool chemical. The puddle in the ditch was frothy and steaming slightly in the cold air. I pulled out my phone and dialed the 24-hour spill response line for the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. "Emergency spill reporting," the operator answered. "My name is Jack Miller," I said, my voice flat and hard. "I need to report an active chemical discharge into a protected waterway at the Emerald Hills entrance. I have video evidence, license plates, and the chemical is currently moving toward the aquifer. We'll dispatch a HAZMAT officer immediately," she said. I hung up. I looked at the gate. They had cut halfway through the top rail, scarring the red paint, but the chain held. The gate still stood. Sterling thought this was a property fight. He thought it was about boundaries and easements. He didn't understand that when you fight with the land fights back. He had tried to cut a lock, but instead, he had poisoned the very water he was trying to sell as a luxury amenity. I looked at the puddle of sludge seeping into the earth. "You just lost the war, Sterling," I said to the darkness. I didn't need to fix the gate. I didn't need to call Saul yet. I just needed to wait for the sun to come up so the EPA could see exactly what kind of neighbors Emerald Hills really were. The night was quiet again, but it was the quiet of a fuse burning down, and the explosion was going to be spectacular. The EPA team arrived at 8 a.m. They were efficient, clinical, and terrifyingly thorough. By noon, they had flagged the ditch with yellow caution tape and issued a stop work order for the entire entrance area pending soil remediation. Sterling Vance watched from a distance, pacing near his Lexus, yelling into his phone. He looked pale, but I wasn't watching the EPA. I was looking at something else. While the HAZMAT crew was digging samples, I noticed where the pool guys had dragged their hose. They had pushed back some brush near the property line, revealing a trench scar in the earth. It was old, maybe 6 months, but still visible to a trained eye. It ran straight from the main county road under my fence line and directly to the Emerald Hills gatehouse. I walked over and kicked the dirt. A gray PVC conduit was barely visible, buried shallow. Next to it, a black water line. I went back to the truck and grabbed my locator, a magnetic wand used to find buried utilities. I swept it over the trench. The wand screamed, 50 hertz, AC current, high voltage. I pulled the 1975 plat again. I checked the easement log. There was absolutely no record of a utility easement granted to Emerald Hills across parcel 44B. They hadn't just stolen my land for the road. They had illegally trenched high-voltage power and pressurized water lines through my timber to feed their guard shack and fountain. I called Saul. "Saul," I said, hypothetically, "if I find unauthorized high-voltage lines buried 18 inches deep in a commercial timber zone without an easement, what are my obligations?" "Obligation?" Saul chuckled darkly. "Jack, you don't have obligations. You have a liability nightmare. If a tree root hits that line and starts a fire, you're responsible. If a logger hits it, you're negligent. So, what do I do?" "You demand immediate abatement," Saul said. "You call the utility company. You tell them they have energized equipment on private property without a legal right-of-way. They'll panic. They'll be out there in an hour. And if they disconnect it, then Sterling Vance is going to have to learn to live by candlelight," Saul said. "Do it." I hung up and dialed the emergency line for Clearwater Power and Light. I didn't press 1 for customer service. I pressed 4 for infrastructure safety and reporting. "Operations, this is Steve." "Steve, this is Jack Miller. I'm the owner of parcel 44B on North Ridge. I'm looking at an unpermitted 400-amp service feed running across my land. It's shallow buried, maybe 18 inches, unmarked, and it's feeding a commercial structure next door. I have heavy equipment operating in this area for remediation. I need this line de-energized immediately before we have a fatality." The change in tone was instant. Utility companies fear 2 things: wildfires and wrongful death lawsuits. "Unpermitted?" Steve asked, his voice tight. "You're sure?" "I have the deed and the easement log in my hand," I said. "There is no record of this run. It's a rogue install." "Stay clear of the area," Steve ordered. "I'm rolling a bucket truck now." 40 minutes later, a massive white utility truck rumbled up the county road. The driver, a lineman named Rick who looked like he wrestled bears for cardio, hopped out. He was wearing flame-retardant clothes and a hard hat scarred by years of work. He looked at the trench. He looked at my survey stakes. He looked at the meter can mounted on the back of the HOA's stone pillar. "Well, I'll be damned," Rick muttered. "This isn't one of ours. We didn't trench this." "Who did?" I asked. "Developer probably hired a private electrician to tap the transformer down the road," Rick spat, looking disgusted. "Cheaper than paying for a proper easement and a commercial run. We call 'em wildcat lines. Dangerous as hell." He walked over to the transformer box at the edge of the county road, the legal connection point. He popped the lock with his master key and swung the door open. He traced the wires. "Yep," Rick confirmed. "Here it is, tapped right off the secondary lugs. Sloppy work too, no conduit seal." He looked at me. "Mr. Miller, I can't leave this hot. It's a code violation, it's a fire hazard, and it's trespassing on your equipment. I have to kill it." "Safety first," I said, leaning against my truck. Rick put on his heavy rubber gloves. He grabbed a long fiberglass hot stick. He reached into the transformer cabinet. At that moment, Sterling Vance came running up the road. He must have seen the utility truck from his office window. He was sweating, his tie undone, looking less like a CEO and more like a man whose lifeboat was springing leaks. "Wait!" Sterling screamed, waving his arm. "Don't touch that. That powers the sales center. That powers the server. We have closing documents on that system." Rick didn't even turn around. He was focused on the high voltage. "Sir, stand back," Rick barked. "This is a safety isolation. You can't cut the power," Sterling grabbing the edge of the truck. "We have the fountains running. We have the security gates. You'll kill the whole entrance." I stepped forward. "Sterling, that line is illegally buried on my land. If my crew hits it while fixing the environmental mess you made, we die. It gets cut, now. We can work this out," Sterling yelled, his eyes darting between me and the lineman. "I'll sign an easement right now. I'll pay you." "You had a month to ask for an easement," I said. "You stole it instead." Rick clamped the stick onto the fuse barrel. He looked at Sterling. Clear, clack. The sound was sharp and final, a mechanical separation of metal. The effect was instantaneous. Behind Sterling, the hum of the massive fountain pumps. A sound that had polluted the silence of the mountain weeks died. The jets of water sputtered, faltered, and collapsed into the pools with a pathetic splash. The lights in the guard shack winked out. The electronic gate, the one I had blocked with the cattle gate, let out a low groan as the magnetic locks disengaged, leaving it limp and useless. And up at the clubhouse, the sales center, the warm glow of the windows vanished. The air conditioning units on the roof shuddered to a halt. Silence crashed back into the valley. Real, heavy silence. Sterling stared at the dead fountain. He looked at the dark windows of his sales center. He realized exactly what this meant. No computers, no phone, no glossy presentations on the big screen, no espresso machine, no air conditioning for the investors from Dubai. The luxury experience had just been unplugged. Rick locked the transformer cabinet and tagged it with a red tag that read "Do not re-energize hazard." He stripped off his gloves and looked at Sterling. "You want power back. You submit a commercial application, pay the engineering fee, get a legal easement from this gentleman," he pointed at me, "and have the county inspector sign off on a new install. Current lead time for new commercial service is about 12 weeks. 12 weeks, Sterling whispered. "I have pre-sales closing on Friday." Rick shrugged. "Should have called us first, buddy." He tipped his hard hat to me. "Have a good one, Mr. Miller." I watched the truck drive away. Sterling stood in the road, surrounded by the wreckage of his arrogance. The EPA tape fluttered in the wind. The fountains were stagnant. The power was out. And the gate was locked. He turned to me, his face drained of all color. The anger was gone, replaced by pure, hollow fear. He finally understood the geometry of the situation. He wasn't fighting a neighbor. He was fighting the infrastructure of the real world. "You're destroying me," he said softly. "Why are you doing this?" "I didn't do anything, Sterling," I said, walking back to my truck. "I just followed the rules. You're the one who thought you were above them." I opened the door and looked back at him one last time. "Better go buy some ice," I said. "It's gonna get hot in that glass office." I drove away, leaving him in the gathering dusk of a power-free development. The dominoes were falling fast now. The road was blocked. The water was poisoned. The power was cut. All that was left was the final blow, the courtroom. And unlike Sterling, I had nothing to hide. Superior Court Courtroom 4 is a place designed to make you feel small. The ceilings are too high, the wood paneling is too dark, and the seal of the state hangs behind the judge's bench like a watching eye. It smells of floor wax and anxiety. Sterling Vance had brought an army. His legal team occupied the plaintiff's table like an invading force. 4 attorneys in bespoke suits, 3 paralegals managing stacks of bankers' boxes, and Sterling himself, looking pale and diminished without his Yule tan, sitting in the center. They had laptops, projectors, and a confidence that comes from billing $500 an hour. At the defense table, it was just me and Saul. Saul had one yellow legal pad and a single, thin binder. He looked like he was waiting for a bus. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Keller entered. He was an older man, bald, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a reputation for hating wasted time. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and looked over the rim of his glasses at the assembly. "We are here for the matter of Emerald Hills Development versus Miller," Judge Keller said. "Motion for permanent injunction and counter-motion for abatement. Mr. Fairchild, you may proceed." Sterling's lead attorney, a man named Fairchild who looked like a silver-haired senator, stood up. He buttoned his jacket and walked to the podium. His voice was smooth, practiced, and filled with fake sorrow. "Your Honor," Fairchild began, gesturing broadly, "this case is a tragedy of misunderstanding. We freely admit that due to a regrettable surveyor's error, a small portion of the Emerald Hills entrance encroaches upon Mr. Miller's unused timberland. We have stipulated to this fact." He paused for effect. "However, Mr. Miller's response has been one of vindictive obstruction. He has blocked emergency access. He has caused massive economic damage. We are asking the court to apply the doctrine of relative hardship. To force my client to move this road now would cost millions. It would bankrupt the project. It would harm hundreds of innocent homeowners." Fairchild leaned on the podium, looking earnest. "We are prepared to offer Mr. Miller 3 times the market value for the affected acreage. We want to pay him, but he refuses. He wants to destroy a beautiful community amenity simply out of spite. We ask the court to grant us a prescriptive easement by necessity and set a fair price for the land." It was a good speech. It was the checkbook justice argument. "We made a mistake, but we're rich and he's not, so let us pay a fine and keep the stolen goods." Sterling nodded solemnly from his seat. He looked like the victim. Judge Keller made a note. "Mr. Goodman," Saul stood up. He didn't walk to the podium. He stood by his chair, hands in his pockets. "Your Honor," Saul said, his voice raspy, "my client doesn't want money. He wants his property rights. The plaintiff argues hardship. We argue theft. And the law is clear. You cannot claim hardship if the hardship was self-inflicted." "It was an error," Fairchild interrupted. "An honest engineering mistake." Judge Keller raised a hand. "Counsel, let Mr. Goodman finish." "We intend to prove," Saul continued, "that there was no error. There was only calculation." Saul called me to the stand. I walked up, swore the oath, and sat in the witness box. I adjusted the microphone. I looked at Sterling. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mr. Miller," Saul said, approaching the box, "you are a retired surveyor, correct?" "Yes, 40 years licensed in this state." "And you reviewed the boundary line." "I did." "Mr. Fairchild claims this was a complex boundary. Was it difficult to find the true line?" "No," I said flatly. "It was marked by 3 iron pins and a blaze on a ponderosa pine. You could find it with a compass and a piece of string. A first-year apprentice wouldn't have missed it." Saul nodded. "So, in your expert opinion, how did a professional engineering firm miss it by 300 feet? "Objection," Fairchild snapped. "Speculation." "Sustained," Judge Keller said. "Mr. Goodman, move it along." Saul smiled. "Mr. Miller, please look at Defense Exhibit F." Saul handed a document to the bailiff, who handed it to me. He also handed copies to Fairchild and the judge. Fairchild took the paper, glanced at it, and I saw his spine stiffen. He leaned over to whisper frantically to Sterling. Sterling looked at the paper and his face went from pale to gray. "Mr. Miller," Saul said, "what is that document?" "This," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, "is an email chain subpoenaed from Apex Geomatics, the original survey firm hired by Emerald Hills 2 years ago. Please read the highlighted section from the lead surveyor to Mr. Vance, dated March 12th. I looked down at the paper. I didn't need to read it. I had memorized it, but I read it for the record. Subject: boundary issue/water feature. Sterling, we have a problem. The Arctic Spring is located 300 feet west of the property line. If you want to capture the gravity feed for the fountains, we have to move the entrance road onto the Miller parcel. We cannot build the gatehouse as designed without crossing the line. The courtroom went silent, the kind of silence where you can hear the HVAC system humming. And, Saul said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "Please read Mr. Vance's reply, sent 10 minutes later." I looked at Sterling. He was staring at the table, a vein throbbing in his temple. Mr. Vance replied, "Just do it. The guy is an absentee owner. He's never there. Shift the line on the grading plan. By the time he notices, we'll have the road in and he'll have to settle. I'm not losing that water source." "Get it done." Gasps. Actual gasps from the gallery. Fairchild closed his eyes. He knew. In that second, he knew he wasn't fighting a property dispute anymore. He was fighting a fraud case. Saul turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this wasn't an error. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated decision to steal my client's land because they thought he was too old, too absent, and too poor to fight back. They banked on the relative hardship doctrine. They manufactured the hardship to force a sale." Saul sat down. Judge Keller looked at the email. Then he looked at Sterling Vance. The look wasn't angry. It was something worse. It was disappointed. "Mr. Fairchild," the judge said, his voice ice cold, "do you have an explanation for this?" Fairchild stood up slowly. "Your Honor, I was not made aware of this correspondence. I request a recess to confer with my client." "Denied," Judge Keller snapped. "I've heard enough. The clean hands doctrine applies here, counselor. You cannot ask for equity when you come to the court with dirty hands. And these hands," he waved the email, "these hands are filthy." The judge turned to me. Mr. Miller stepped down. I returned to my seat. The air in the room felt electric, heavy with the impending strike. Judge Keller opened his folder. He uncapped his pen. He didn't look at his notes. He looked straight at the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Vance," the judge began, "property rights are the foundation of this republic. You don't get to take what you want just because you can afford the asphalt to cover it up. You gambled that the court would save you from your own greed. You lost." He began to write. He wrote, "The court finds in favor of the defendant, Jack Miller, on all counts. The plaintiff's claim of adverse possession is dismissed with prejudice. The plaintiff's request for equitable relief is denied due to clear evidence of malicious intent and bad faith." Sterling slumped in his chair, but the judge wasn't done. "Furthermore," Judge Keller said, his voice rising, "I am issuing a mandatory injunction. Emerald Hills Development is hereby ordered to remove all encroachments from Parcel 44B. This includes the roadway, the gatehouse, the fountains, the underground utilities, and the landscaping." Sterling stood up, panic overriding his lawyer's grip. "Your Honor, that will cost $5 million. It will destroy the entrance. We can't." "Sit down." Judge Keller's gavel banged like a gunshot. "I am not finished." Sterling collapsed back into his chair. "You will restore the grade to its natural state," the judge continued. "You will replant native timber consistent with the surrounding forest. You will remediate the environmental damage caused by your illegal chemical dumping, as per the EPA's separate filing." The judge leaned forward. "And you will complete this restoration within 60 days. For every day past 60 that a single ounce of your concrete remains on Mr. Miller's land, the court will impose a fine of $50,000 per day." "50,000, Sterling whispered, horrified. "Mr. Goodman," the judge said to Saul, "submit your billable hours. I am awarding full legal fees to the defense. And I am referring the transcript of this trial to the district attorney's office regarding the potential fraud and environmental crime." Judge Keller closed the folder. The sound was like a coffin lid slamming shut. "Court is adjourned." The gavel struck. The room erupted into noise. Reporters were running for the door. Sterling's lawyers were frantically packing up, trying to distance themselves from their radioactive client. Sterling sat frozen, staring at the empty bench, trying to process the magnitude of the disaster. He hadn't just lost the land. He had lost the development. Without the entrance, without the water, without the luxury image, and with a looming criminal investigation, Emerald Hills was dead. I stood up. I shook Saul's hand. "Nice work, Saul," I said. "Easy work, Jack," Saul grinned. "You gave me the bullets. I just pulled the trigger. I walked past the plaintiff's table on my way out. Sterling looked up at me. His eyes were red, hollowed out by shock. "You ruined me," he rasped. "Over a few 100 feet of dirt, you ruined everything." I stopped. I looked at him, really looked at him one last time. "No, Sterling," I said. "You ruined yourself. I just held the line." I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright, clean afternoon light. The air smelled of city exhaust and coffee, but in my mind I could already smell the pine trees that were going to grow back on my ridge. The war was over. Now the cleanup began, and I knew just the crew for the job. There is a specific kind of satisfaction in watching a mistake be corrected. Usually, in my line of work, that means erasing a pencil line on a draft or pulling a survey stake. But this correction was louder. This correction required diesel fuel and hydraulics. 60 days. That was the deadline the judge gave them. And since Sterling Vance had been fired by his own board of directors 3 days after the verdict, the new management of Emerald Hills wasn't taking any chances with the $50,000 a day fine. They needed the encroachments gone, and they needed it done fast. They called 3 demolition crews from the city. All of them were booked. So, in a twist of irony that you couldn't write in a novel without it feeling heavy-handed, they had to call the only bonded heavy equipment operator in the immediate vicinity. Me, well, technically they hired Mike, but I was the site supervisor. The morning the excavators rolled in, the air was crisp. The sales center was empty, the windows papered over. The fountains were dry concrete husks. Mike climbed into the cab of his Komatsu 300. He revved the engine, a puff of black smoke signaling the start of the shift. He looked at me from the cab and grinned. "Where do you want to start, boss?" he yelled. I pointed to the massive stone archway, to the gold letters that read Emerald Hills Estates. "Start at the top," I said. "Bring it down." The demolition wasn't violent. It was methodical. It was surgery. Mike swung the boom, the bucket teeth catching the top of the stone veneer. With a low growl of the hydraulics he pulled. The stone crumbled. The cedar beams snapped. The gold letters twisted and fell into the dust. For 3 weeks we worked. We tore up the 4 lanes of asphalt, grinding it into gravel to be hauled away. We dug up the illegal utility line. We smashed the concrete basins of the fountain. We pulled the guard shack apart, piece by arrogant piece. And the best part, every Friday, the Emerald Hills HOA had to cut a check to Mike's company for the privilege of having their own property destroyed. When we pulled the steel gates, the ones Sterling had screamed about, the ones I had locked with a cattle chain, we piled them on a flatbed. It was 5 tons of high-grade steel. I took the scrap check, nearly $3,000, and walked it down to the county fire station. I handed it to the chief. "What's this for?" he asked, looking at the check. "It's a donation," I said, "from the Emerald Hills Gate Fund. Buy the boys some new turnout gear, and maybe a new set of bolt cutters just in case." The chief laughed. "You made quite a mess up there, Jack." "No, Chief," I said. "I cleaned one up." 6 months later, I parked my truck at the top of the North Ridge. The asphalt is gone. The scar in the earth has been ripped deep, the compacted road base aerated and mixed with compost. We planted 2,000 Douglas fir saplings in the reclaimed soil. They are small now, just green tufts poking out of the dark earth, but they are there. The Arctic spring runs free again. We removed the pipes, restored the stream bed, and now the water tumbles over the basalt rocks, clear and cold, feeding the creek instead of a fountain. I sat on the tailgate pouring a cup of coffee. There is no hum of pumps. There is no splash of chlorinated water. There is no traffic. Down below, past my property line, the Emerald Hills development is quiet. The grand entrance is gone, replaced by a modest gravel turnoff on their side of the boundary. The development stalled. Without the luxury gate, the hype died down. It's just another subdivision now, struggling to sell lots. But up here, the wind moves through the trees with a sound like ocean wave. A red-tailed hawk circles overhead, screaming its piercing cry. I took a sip of coffee and looked at the sapling. In 20 years they will be trees. In 40 years they will be a forest. And the scar of the road will be nothing but a slight variation in the undergrowth. A story the land tells to those who know how to read. Sterling thought he could buy the view. He thought he could buy the water. He learned the hard way that some things aren't for sale. I capped my thermos. The sun was dipping below the peaks, casting long blue shadows across the snow. The line holds. The mountain is silent, and that is exactly how it should be.